It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Serbia. Here we go. Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin, and we continue Series 25 on the groups and players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Serbia's players. It's actually part 2 of the Players Mediacast, and here we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to that part 1 in the show notes. This episode, part 2, will be divided into 2 sections. In section 1, we'll look over the list that we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. And in section 2, we summarize surprises in the selection and review injuries. Let's begin then, and we'll take a quick look at their preliminary squad. So they did release a squad. We're not dead sure what the date was, but it was shortly before May 19th, and it was a 35-man preliminary squad. And then on May 27th, they reduced that to a 26-man squad, which is what teams are allowed in this tournament. So that means they started with 35 players and then had to cut 9 of them to reduce the squad to the proper size. Okay, let's take a look, jumping into section 1 at the candidates. And Dragan Stojkovic remains their manager, wasn't fired shortly before the Cup, so we'll say that he was a selection for the squad. And let's go to goalkeepers. So we do have a new goalkeeper. I'm going to add him to the list there, but we'll deal with the candidates we had first. So we had Vanja Milinkovic-Savic as a definite candidate, but he did have an injury doubt hanging over him, but he was selected for the squad, and we'll talk about the injury in the section 2 there. We also had 2 likely goalies, Predrag Rajkovic, who was selected for the squad, and Georgi Petrovic also selected. So those are their 3 goalkeepers. And we did have Alexandra Jovanovic, who was added to the squad, the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. So we won't go into detail on him. We'll only do players who made the final squad. Before we move on, we'll take a look at their 2 warm-up games before the tournament. So they played Austria and Sweden. And in terms of goalkeeper, it was Milinkovic-Savic starting the first one and Rajkovic starting the second one. But we remain pretty convinced that Milinkovic-Savic will be the starter. Okay, on to the central defense, and we actually, despite having a number of candidates here, we have 3 more to add, and I'll just add them to the list, but we'll talk about them more at the end. Okay, so we had 2 definite candidates on the list, and the first one was Strahinja Pavlovic, who was selected for the squad, and also Nikola Milinkovic was selected as well. Our one likely candidate, Strahinja Erakovic, is a bit of a surprise. We had him as likely, but he only made the preliminary squad and didn't make the final squad there. However, our possible candidate, 2 of them made it ahead of Erakovic there. The first was Milos Velkovic, and the second, Surdan Babic, both of those making it. Babic also was an injury doubt in part 1, We'll talk about that in section 2 when we cover injuries. But obviously, he recovered from that injury enough to be selected. Our third possible candidate, though, Erhan Masovic, was not selected. Let's take a closer look at our new candidates. The first is Uroš Spajic. So he's not new to the Serbian team. He had been off the team since November 2021, and then was surprisingly named to the preliminary squad for this tournament. So we'll introduce him here because we didn't talk about him in part 1. Uroš Spajic is 31 years old, with Serbia since 2015 and 21 caps and no goals. And he was selected for the World Cup in 2018 on the roster there, but didn't see any action, just on the bench. For the 2022 World Cup, he was not selected. An injury may have played a role in that, but it just looks like he had been off the team for a year by that point. So, but now making comeback, Uroš Spajic. The second candidate is Nemanja Stojic, and he first appeared in January 2023, so he kind of was on our radar. He was on a list of players who started a January friendly with the USA, where they had kind of brought in a lot of new players to take a look at them. So we didn't really take that list too seriously unless they had played after. In the case of Stojic, he had started just that one game, and he had been on the bench for 3 and not selected for 10 others, and had been off the team since March 2023 until he was called back for the warm-up game. So Nemanja Stojic not only selected for the preliminary squad, but the final squad too. And I'll just say, sorry, he's 26 years old and plays for Red Star Belgrade in Serbia, just like Spajic in his second stint with them, but doesn't have the vast experience that Spajic does. The third candidate is Giancarlo Simic, and we won't talk about him much because he just made the preliminary squad, didn't make the final cut, and he had never been he had never appeared for the squad prior to being named to the preliminary squad. So we won't see him in the finals, but we will. Well, we may see the other ones. Let's look at the warm-up games and just see who is being used in central defence. So in the first of the warm-up games, it was a 2-man central defence, and it was central midfielder Gudelj starting. That's not as unusual as it sounds. He did play as a central defender in the first half of the period, or say first half of 2023, and then moved to a central midfielder, a defensive midfielder role. And some sources still do have him listed as a central defender. So Gudelj alongside Milos Veljkovic are possible candidates. So that looks like the first game was a bit experimental. And I should say, actually, Spajic, Uroš Spajic, our new candidate, started as a right back in that game. And Strihanja Pavlovic started as a left back. He was a definite central defender for us. So a bit of experimentation in the first game. The second game is possibly looks a little bit more like what they'll do. It was a 3-man defense with Pavlovic and Milenkovic, our two definite candidates, alongside newcomers Stojic there in central defense. Okay, let's move on to the left wingers. I promise that not all sections will be as long as and complex as that. Sorry, I said left wingers. Oh, and I meant it because we reorganized things a bit here because they use a 3-man defense a lot. So we have the players moved up to a winger position. So left wingers, we had definite candidate Filip Kostic, and he was selected, and also Filip Mladenovic, also selected for the squad. And we had a possible but unlikely candidate in Alexa Terzic, but he was not selected even for the preliminary squad. So that is left wingers, or two left wingers. And in game one, we saw there was no left winger role, but in game two, Mladenovic played the role of left winger. On the right winger side, we had definite candidate Andrija Zivkovic, and he was selected for the squad. And then we had two possible candidates. The first one, Nemanja Radonjic. He was selected for the preliminary squad, Radonjic, but didn't make the final cut there. And we also had Milan Gajic as a possible candidate, and he's quite a story, but ultimately injury is part of his story, and we'll cover that interesting story in section 2, but he was not selected for the squad. In terms of the games, again, the position of right winger was not used in game one, but Zivkovic did play as a right attacking midfielder in the first game, and then as a winger in the second game. So that kind of suggests that he will be a starter in the cup. Okay, we move up to defensive midfield here, and we have no definite or likely candidates. But we do have a possible candidate, and we also have two new candidates here, so I'm going to add them to the list. But first, we'll talk about the possible candidate, Nemanja Maksimovic, and he was selected for the squad. And the first of our new candidates is Serdan Mihailovic. Serdan Mihailovic, and an interesting story here. He resumed play for the national team after more than 11 years absent from the national team. So actually, he should have made our list in part one. We didn't do our homework well enough because he had returned in March 2024 and started one of their games. But anyway, since March 2024, he started one, subbed in for one, and was on the bench for the two warm-up games here. So Mihailovic is 31 years old, just 7 caps for the national team since 2012. And now he's back, and yet another player in his second stint with Red Star Belgrade in Serbia. And Mihailovic has also played in Russia and Turkey. But wow, back after 11 years. Good job, Serdan Mihailovic. The other new candidate is Sasha Jelar. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Sasha Jelar. And he's actually with CSKA Moscow in Russia, a good club affiliation there, but we won't go into detail on him because he was selected only for the preliminary squad and didn't make the final cut. So he also had returned after an absence, 3 years in his case, but again, didn't make the final squad. So Nemanja Maksimovic and Serdan Mihailovic are two defensive midfielders, but we also have candidates for central midfield. So Nemanja Gudelj, who we saw starting as a central defender, there was a likely candidate here and was selected. Ivan Ilic and Sasha Lukic, both of those likely candidates, and both of those making it as well. And then we had a possible candidate in Marko Gruzic, and he was not selected even for the preliminary squad. So let's look at the warm-up games in terms of trying to determine if we can find out a starter. And we actually have Sergei Milinkovic-Savic starting alongside Maksimovic, our possible candidate for defensive midfielder in the first game. We'll come to Sergei Milinkovic-Savic. We moved him to attacking midfield, even though he is coded as a central midfielder. So Maksimovic, the only one of our candidates here, starting the first game. But in the second game, we see our two possible, our two likely midfielders, Ilic and Lukic, starting alongside Sergei Milinkovic-Savic there in a three-man central defence. That formation was a 3-5-2 formation. So Milinkovic-Savic sometimes plays as an attacking midfielder, but looks like a starter as a central midfielder if the warm-ups are anything to go by. And we did see that the second game there looks more like the starting lineup they'll use. So that gives Ilic and Lukic a chance of being starters. Okay, let's move to left midfielders. And we do have a new candidate, and it is, we didn't have any candidates on the list there. So we have Mijat Gacinovic and as a new candidate. Actually, we did have him on our list. We did have him on our list, but we hadn't put him on the list. Gacinovic had returned after an almost 3-year absence in October 2023, and he started 3 of their remaining 8 games, as well as subbing in for 1 and on the bench for 1. So we should have had him on our list. I guess we didn't do our homework well enough there. And Gacinovic was selected. He's 28 years old and been with Serbia since 2017 with 23 caps and 2 goals, and plays for AEK Athens in Greece since 2002. So Serbian fans may have been wondering where he was, and we'll admit to some fault there. That we just he somehow got past us. Anyway, Mijat Gacinovic was selected, and they don't really have a left midfielder, so he's probably more of a left attacker. And indeed, in the first of those 2 friendlies, he did start as a left attacking midfielder. Okay, moving on upfield, we move on to that left attacking midfielder role, or the left attacking role. And here we have 3 new candidates. Holy smokes. But we will talk about them after we talk about the candidates who are here. So the candidates we had were likely candidate Sergei Milinkovic-Savic, who we just met as a central midfielder. And he had played as an attacking midfielder for most of the period that we looked at from 2023 to March 2024. But now we see him back as a central midfielder, a likely candidate, and of course made the final squad. The other one was a possible candidate in Filip Jurisic, and he was not selected even for the preliminary squad. But we do have 3 new candidates in this position. The first one is Veljko Birmancevic. And he had returned after a 3.5-year absence in June of 2024. So just for the warm-up games, he came back. He didn't start either of those, but he was subbed in for both. And Veljko Birmancevic was selected for the final squad. So he is 26 years old. Been with Serbia since 2021 with 5 caps and no goals, playing for Sparta Prague in Czech Republic since 2024, and Toulouse in France before that. So we will see him in the cup, or we might not see him, maybe as a sub, it seems. Our 2 other candidates are both players who made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Neither of them had been selected before being named to the preliminary squad there. And the first one is Alexander Surkovic, and the second is Matija Glusovic. So again, neither of those making the squad, so we won't dwell on them. And we'll move instead to the right attacking part of the field. And we have Dusan Tadic over here, the captain of the team, and he was selected. And we have Lazar Samardzic as a likely candidate, and he too was selected for the squad. We saw actually that Zivkovic played as the right attacking midfielder in the first game. Dusan Tadic, though, did play as the central attacking midfielder in that game. However, neither of them appeared in the second game. At least I should say neither of them started in the second game. Okay, we don't have any candidates for central attacking midfielder, so we can move on to the forwards. And here we had definite candidate Alexander Mitrovic, and he was selected. And we have two possible candidates. The first one is Dusan Vlahovic, and the other Luka Jovic, both of those selected for the final squad. And then we had two possible but unlikely candidates, Dejan Joveljic and Petar Ratkov. And somewhat surprisingly, Petar Ratkov was selected for the final squad. There are also two candidates here who just made the preliminary squad but not the final squad, so we won't go much beyond mentioning them. The first is Samed Bazdar, and the second is Mihailo Ivanovic, who plays for Vojvodina in Serbia. And the only reason I'm telling you that is that Vojvodina is such a fun word to say. Okay, in terms of the warm-up games, we have Vlahovic starting both, first as the sole forward, and in the second game, two forwards, the other one being Mitrovic. So that's good for Dusan Vlahovic. It kind of gives him more of a chance of being a starter, but it would be surprising to see him starting ahead of Alexander Mitrovic as he did in that first game, but maybe not surprising if we saw them starting together. Okay, that brings us to the end of section one. Wow, that was much longer than most teams, more complex because of all the new players they brought in. Partly. Let's review surprises, and we have really only one notable non-selection, and that is likely central defender Strahinja Arakovic, not selected for the squad. And then a couple of surprise inclusions. Mijat Gasinovic, we had him as a possible but unlikely candidate. But that was kind of a mistake. We should have had him on the roster in the first place. And let me see. Yeah, he should have been probably at least a possible candidate, and maybe even a likely candidate. No, I'd say a possible candidate. So that's not really a surprise. But the next one is Petar Ratkov, possible but unlikely candidate. A forward who was selected for the squad. And then we have a raft of new players, so I'll just go over the names, beginning with the ones who made the squad. No, only the ones who made the squad, I'll say. Uro Spajic, a central defender, added to the squad, and Nemanja Stojic also listed as a central defender, but we saw both of them. We saw Spajic playing as a right back in the warm-up game, so perhaps he's designated to play that position. We have left midfielder Mijat Gasinovic, who actually played more as a left attacking midfielder, making the squad. Defensive midfielder Serjan Mihailovic, and left attacker Veljko Bermancevic. All those added to the squads. Beside that, there was a raft of players who made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. But we won't trouble ourselves with those. And instead, we'll move on to injuries. So first of all, we have a goalkeeper. These are players who recovered from injury. We have goalkeeper Vanja Milenkovic-Savic. He was out with an unknown injury for the last game of the season, but he was due back May 31st. So I don't think there was a lot of alarm about his injury, and anyway, he overcame it. So again, we think he's going to be the starter. and he did play the warm-up game, so no problem there. The other was Surdan Babic. He was tagged with a hamstring strain since early May, although he was back on the bench for the last game of the season with his club. And he had a due date of coming back on June 13th, and he was selected for the squad. So we can assume he was recovered. Perhaps that injury might trouble him in the tournament, but he is fit enough to be selected. We don't have any players dropped due to injury. And then we finish with the story of Milan Gadžić. I'll put him in the injured but was not a strong candidate. And what happened with him, it's not funny. I mean, especially if you're him. He got a call-up after a 3-year absence in March of 2024, and he didn't start either of those 2 games, but he subbed in for the first of them, and he got a red card. I have him as subbing into the match, but he got the red card 21 minutes into the match. So whether he subbed in or started, he got a red card. So obviously he was suspended for the game after that, the second game in March. And then by the time June came around, he was out with a hamstring injury. I actually have 2 separate reports. One says hamstring, one says muscle, out since mid-May and not expected back on June 17th. So I think there was some hope of him at least being fit to return to the cup. But alas, Milan Gadžić, his sad story ends with not being selected for the squad, even for the preliminary squad. All right, well, that was a much longer media cast than it'll be for most teams, but we did get through both sections, and I hope this look at Serbia increases your enjoyment when you watch them in the cup. Hey, have fun watching the cup, everyone. We would like to thank Mike Tripak, Big Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this media cast.